This DVD may be of general interest, but is particularly intended above all for people who are unable to reach the top floors of the house. However, let's recap briefly and start with the house on the harbour, as it was when the young James Cook was apprenticed to Captain John Walker. There was a slipway in the centre of the yard. The cottage was half the size it is now, and used simply as a storeroom. It was a convenient place for the centre of a busy shipping business. This part of the site has changed much since Cook knew it. The old kitchen was demolished, and the store extended to form the cottage as you see it today. This meant inserting a huge chimney in the middle of it. The cottage with its fine door cases signals that by the end of the 18th century, the Walkers had become very prosperous. Gradually the site became more domestic and lost its close association with shipping. You enter the orientation room, an elegant room which dates from later than Cook. Here the maps show how the world was understood before the voyages of Cook. There are Dutch, French and Italian maps from earlier centuries. The cottage was built on top of the patterned brick floor of the old kitchen without bothering to put in a new foundation for this wall. The kitchen is furnished, as is the house, with objects and furniture that were in the house in the early 1750s when an inventory was drawn up. The furniture is simple but good quality, made to last, as befitted the Quaker beliefs of the Walkers. The rooms on the first floor were originally the main bedchambers. These now house exhibits about Whitby in Cook's day, his life in London, and much rich material about the voyages. Climbing higher to the upper chambers, the second floor houses the scientist's room and the artist's room. The scientist's room focuses on some of the contributions to knowledge that resulted from the voyages. Cook himself was elected to the Royal Society of London, the most important learned society of the time. The very idea of taking naturalists or scientists on a voyage was something new. Thousands of previously unknown species of plants and animals were brought back, exciting enormous interest in Britain and throughout Europe. In place of the photographers who would be used in modern times, artists were taken to make visual records of the landscape, the new species discovered, and the peoples the explorers encountered. Joseph Banks, the naturalist, organised the collection and recording of many plants on the first voyage. Sidney Parkinson, one of the young artists in Banks' party, made careful drawings of each new plant found to show the structure, the stem, and each side of the leaves, together with seeds and flowers if they were available. The colours were recorded before they faded. Parkinson died on the return journey from fever at Batavia, but he had worked up a number of his sketches into watercolours, and Banks employed other artists to produce finished watercolours from the sketches and specimens brought home. These were afterwards engraved ready for publication, but the project never got beyond the proof stage. It took another 200 years before the drawings were finally published, when in 1989 Alecto Editions completed 100 sets of 738 coloured drawings with meticulous care from Banks' original plates. The examples here show plants from Australia, New Zealand and the Society Islands. It remains a puzzle why Joseph Banks did not complete the publication of all these plants during the remainder of his long life. He died in 1820. It was of course expensive and patronage was essential. Lord Sandwich, First Lord of the Admiralty between 1771 and 1782, was an enthusiastic and tireless supporter of voyages of discovery. When Cook returned from the second voyage, Sandwich hurried down to Galleon's Reach to meet him and was fascinated by the objects brought back. As the letter shows, he passed some of the specimens on to Banks' colleague Dr. Solander, and was very concerned to ensure that the results of the voyages were officially published. Cook and his officers also showed huge interest in the customs and languages of the Pacific peoples, and tried very hard to understand them. A Pacific islander, Omai, had come to England in Cook's sister ship, the Adventure, in 1775. Omai's charm and intelligence greatly impressed everyone, and he became a particular favourite of Sandwich, who learned enough Polynesian to be able to communicate with him. Omai visited Whitby with Banks on their way to stay with Lord Mulgrave. He apparently caused a great stir in the streets. Also here is Johann Reinhold Forster's desk, which he took with him on board the Resolution. It has handles so that it can be safely lashed down on board ship. Forster was extremely learned, if rather bad-tempered, but his work and that of his son George contributed enormously to knowledge of both natural history and ethnography. Forster made long lists of Polynesian words and their variants in different islands. Before the 18th century, the peoples of the South Pacific had no metal, and the materials were wood, stone, bone, shells, feathers, human hair, bark, plant fibers, and seeds. After contact with Europe, their culture began to change, so the great interest of these objects is that they show Pacific culture at a time when the islanders had only very few visits from European ships. The officers, scientists, and crew traded and brought back many artifacts with them, some of which may be seen here and next door. There is a magnificent cloak made of the bark of the cedar tree from Nootka Sound, Vancouver Island. The use of the shuttle was unknown to the Indians, and the fibre was woven simply by using the fingers, producing a warm and hard-wearing garment. Music and dancing played an important part in rituals. Cook and his men watched these ceremonies on many occasions. The artists, Parkinson on the first voyage, Hodges on the second, and Weber on the third, made many drawings of the people they met and places visited. These were reproduced in great numbers in the many published accounts of the voyages. Also here is someone else who sailed with Cook. William Bligh, of later Bounty fame, was master of the Resolution. He learned much about surveying and navigation from Cook, whom he admired enormously. Bligh was never the sadistic flogger that he had been portrayed in Hollywood films, but perhaps there is a hint here of something in his character which failed to gain his men's respect. Alongside him is the portrait of his adored wife Elizabeth. The lives of those who stayed at home while their men went off to sea was not easy, and meant months, if not years, of separation. Elizabeth had 6 daughters to keep her busy, though twin sons did not survive. She was also an avid shell collector. Shell collecting became immensely popular with so many new and colourful species being discovered. William no doubt brought back many for her. After she died, her shell collection was sold, and the sale of over 1,000 lots took 6 days to complete. The final stairs, ducking under the low beam, lead to the attic where the apprentices would have slept while in port. This large space, the largest in the house, is by long tradition the place where Cook and the other apprentices lodged. From the window Cook could see the harbour, and across it to the busy shipyards which would later build the ships in which he made his arduous voyages. At that time the room might have been divided by partitions, but it must have been crowded when all the apprentices were in port. The large chimney breasts at each end would have provided some warmth. The apprentices probably slept on straw palliasses and had a small trunk for their possessions. It was perhaps here that the Walkers' housekeeper, Mary Proud, provided the young James with a table and candle so that he could read or study, whilst the other apprentices were engaged in idle talk or trifling amusements. Today the space is also used for exhibitions. First, Cook and his successors. Cook set the standard and trained others to continue the dangerous and demanding work of charting unknown coastlines. He trained William Bligh, who in turn trained Matthew Flinders, the last of the Cook School of Navigators. Second, Sir Joseph Banks, who features a great deal in the museum, was extremely important in the choice of East Coast Australia as the site of a penal colony, and in sustaining it throughout the difficult early years. He acted as patron to both Bligh and to Flinders. Finally, there were always rivals in exploration, above all the French. But respect for knowledge and discovery characterised the Enlightenment culture of this period, and when voyagers met each other in distant places, there was a relatively free exchange of views and information. Cook's great achievement was to make the first chart of the east coast of the continent. On this momentous first voyage, he completed the Transit of Venus astronomical work in Tahiti and circumnavigated New Zealand. He then sailed westward towards Van Diemen's Land, or Tasmania. Sighting Australia off Point Hicks, near the southeastern extremity, Cook coasted northwards to find a suitable place to land. They landed at Botany Bay, so named because of the richness of botanical discoveries. Cook named the land New South Wales and claimed it for King George III. In all, he landed at 5 places in Australia and completed a running coastal survey of the entire eastern seaboard. It was difficult and dangerous work, navigating close inshore in unknown waters, graphically shown when Endeavour struck a reef off northern Queensland. This resulted in a 6-week stay near the now named Endeavour River to complete repairs to the ship. The east coast of Australia was both puzzling and exciting to Joseph Banks and Dr. Daniel Solander, the naturalists on Cook's first voyage. It seemed that agriculture was absent, at least in the sense that Europeans recognised it. The land was open, and there was no undergrowth in the forests, thus giving an impression rather like a park. Aboriginal peoples were thought to be simple hunter-gatherers, but in reality they managed the environment in a resourceful and sustainable way. They used fire in a controlled manner to clear undergrowth and brush, allowing the regeneration of plants and new grass. This encouraged grazing animals and allowed easier hunting. As well as a host of new plants, there were numerous unfamiliar birds which delighted the travellers, colourful parrots, cockatoos and lorikeets. There were also new and strange animals, one of which particularly puzzled the voyagers. This was the kangaroo. They struggled to describe it and even the way it moved, leaping and jumping and outstripping Joseph Banks's 2 greyhounds. Yet within 30 years the animals would be imported into England as exotic rarities. The Queen had live kangaroos in her menagerie at Kew, and the Royal Navy named a 16-gun sloop Kangaroo in 1795. All the voyagers met members of Aboriginal societies, but struggled to communicate with them and understand their culture. Gifts were ignored, and contact generally avoided. At Endeavour River, there was opportunity for greater contact with the local Aboriginal people. Some of the men went on board ship, and attempts were made to construct a basic vocabulary. But the gap in understanding remained huge. Circumstances did not allow the voyagers to experience the complex ceremonial life of Aboriginal societies, or understand their beliefs. But Cook remained open-minded, and saw something admirable in their complete lack of interest in European goods. Because there appeared to be no settled agriculture, Australia was regarded as unoccupied or belonging to no one, and therefore available to be claimed and settled by Europeans. And the problem of what to do with criminals was an old one. Before the American War of Independence, which ended in 1783, many had been shipped to North America to work out their sentence and eventually gain their freedom. With that possibility closed off, other solutions were discussed, and Joseph Banks was consulted. He was cautious, but felt that many of the southerly parts of New South Wales were sufficiently fertile for colonists to support themselves, if properly equipped with the necessary supplies. The first fleet comprised 2 naval frigates, 3 storeships, and 6 convict transports. It was planned in great detail and well supplied, contrary to what is sometimes thought. Setting off in 1787, the fleet arrived at Botany Bay in January 1788. Under the governorship of Captain Arthur Phillip, an experienced and humane officer, they quickly moved to the better site of Port Jackson, present-day Sydney, with its superb harbour. The early years were difficult, partly because of delays on the voyage. Seeds were sown at the wrong time of year and did not flourish. However, officials in London, and Joseph Banks in particular, worked tirelessly to replace lost supplies. European agriculture was established and the colony thrived, and the landscape of Australia began to change dramatically. The early years of the colony were wonderfully depicted by the unknown but talented artist known as the Port Jackson painter. One result of the settlement was the increased need for accurate charts and maps. The young Matthew Flinders joined the Navy and was taught the basics of marine surveying by William Bligh. Posted on a frigate to Australia in 1795, he occupied himself making careful coastal surveys and circumnavigated Tasmania with his friend George Bass. Up to that time, it was not realised that Tasmania was not joined to the mainland. Returning to England in 1800, Flinders shrewdly proposed to Sir Joseph Banks that a complete survey of the Australian coast was needed. Banks put the proposal to the Admiralty, which accepted it. An ex-collier was selected and converted, and Banks took the lead in organising the voyage, which was planned as a scientific voyage on the model of those of Cook. Naturalists, artists and gardeners were selected, and the best instruments provided. The Flinders voyage did not go entirely to plan, with a leaky vessel and crew weakened by scurvy, but Flinders completed the first circumnavigation of the continent and filled in the chart of the southern coast. Travelling with him was the artist Ferdinand Bauer, some of whose superb drawings of plants and animals are shown here. Bauer's accuracy and the beauty with which he depicted both animals and plants won many admirers, though his botanical publication was not a financial success at the time. And it was Ferdinand Bauer who commissioned the travelling writing desk made by a convict from native woods to take back as a present for his brother Franz. While Flinders was making his survey of Australia's coastline, the French were also doing the same. Under the command of Nicolas Baudin, between 1801 and 1803, a lavishly equipped expedition charted and claimed the southern coastline of Australia. The French ships met Flinders and exchanged careful courtesies, and Baudin also reported on the now flourishing colony of Port Jackson. By the 1820s, the name Australia replaced the earlier name of New Holland. This was the name that Flinders himself promoted. European settlement was successful, but also signalled the devastation of indigenous communities by diseases such as smallpox and growing tensions over the appropriation of land and food supplies. It was only in the later 20th century that the rights of indigenous communities began to be recognised. This period also witnessed the revival and development of indigenous arts, which help sustain those beliefs, linking Aboriginal peoples to ancestral beings and sacred sites. Returning down the stairs, across the link above the kitchen of the house, looking out across the harbour, we may reflect on what Cook thought of the strange places and colourful practices he met on his voyages to the other side of the world. The final room shows original drawings done by Weber on Cook's fateful last voyage when attempting to discover the Northwest Passage. These are pictures of the people of Kamchatka in eastern Siberia, where the ships restocked before attempting to sail beyond the Bering Strait. In this room there is also a replica of the stove on board Endeavour, and a display relating to food on board ship during long voyages, how it was cooked, how it was eaten, and what was drunk. On matters of diet, Cook's influence and example was far-reaching. While he did not know the cause of scurvy, his record showed that it was possible to avoid this dreadful disease by careful attention to diet and general health and well-being.
We may also recall the influence on the young Cook of the seafaring community of Whitby, with its tradition of thorough training, together with Quaker beliefs in self-reliance, hard work, and perseverance. Here he spent 9 years in a bustling seaport, serving his apprenticeship and gaining that experience in navigation, seamanship, and leadership which served him so well.